All right. With us being in the depth of winter here in Minnesota, we have quite a few events coming up that a lot of guys are prepping for and getting ready for tournament play. Some tournament play, some narrative play, things like that. And I wanted to put out a video that kind of goes over event slash tournament etiquette and preparation. It's really intended. So the intent of this video is really to help guys prepare for those events, provide a checklist, provide you with some things to consider, just to make sure that you're ready to go when those events come up. And the reason for that is because when you're prepared for those events and you got all your ducks in a row, it kind of helps you maximize your event experience, and it also helps the TOs. Um, it helps them like run a much more smooth event and a much more enjoyable event for everyone who comes and participates. The TOs already have a ton to do, and when people come and they're prepared and they're ready to go and they kind of have a good mindset about the event, it makes the event much more enjoyable for them to run, but also for everyone who's participating, including yourself. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is kind of like, what is the point of going to these events? We have a lot of people out there who are ultra competitive, and that's super fine. But I think it's really important that you go to these events really to socialize with friends, meet new people, and to have fun, right? That's a good mentality to have going into it, because if that's your mentality going into it, regardless of how you end up placing in the event, like you're going to have, generally speaking, a positive outcome unless someone like goes out of their way to ruin the event for you, right? So that's kind of the mentality that I like to go into the events. Do I want to place high? Yeah. Do I want to win games, be in the top 10? Yes. I'd love for that to happen. But if that doesn't happen, I might come away from the event just feeling miserable, right? Whereas if you kind of have it in your mind, like, hey, I'm going to go spend the whole day and just play a pile of games with my buddies, then regardless of where you place, you can still walk away from that event feeling pretty good. So, um, with that said, one of the things I think is really important is both pre and post game is to socialize with your friends, communicate with them, talk about your lists, run lists by people, do prep games where you meet up at your house or at your gaming club or at your store and play games. And this can be a good way and a fun way to get ready for the events by practicing and by socializing and having a good time with your buddies outside of the actual event. Um, Also, that comes with that is, getting your army ready, going through your lists, listing, relisting, painting your armies, things like that. So the prep can be a good part of that. And then post game is talking about the event, socializing about it, adjusting your list, things like that. I always like to set goals for myself. You can either write these down or just have them in their head. They can be A goals, B goals, C goals, just something that you want to obtain other than win the whole thing, right? And maybe that's, I want to paint a new force. I want to play a new faction. I want to buy new models and get them incorporated into my collection. I want to finish the actual event. Sometimes people have a hard time finishing events for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's place higher than I did before, place in a certain bracket. And so having these goals and laying them out and having multiple goals. So if one isn't obtained, maybe you have a chance to go for another goal. Sometimes it can be silly and fun. Maybe you're like, I want to see if I can get, you know, uh, 10 melee kills during this game or something along those, like something relevant to your game, right? Um, so that kind of, those are good ways to set yourselves up just like kind of psychologically for success in the game, is getting these things ready, having a good time, getting yourself kind of in the spirit of enjoying the process of going to an event. The next thing is to be prepared for the event. So write your lists in advance of the event. If you have to do it like real quick, right at the end, the day of, and you don't have that list ready, like you may not have a good experience because your list really isn't ready for the event. And if you're playing something like a 350 event, is having your 250 lists ready to go, ready to rock and roll, and have them broken out in advance. We've talked about this in my list building videos, and that's that by having those ready to go, you're going to make sure that you're saving time between games. You just pull out your sub 250. You know what you're going to play. Maybe you have some minor tweaks depending on the force you're going to play. You're ready to go. You're ready to rock. And so you have your list ready to go. Paint your army to the best of your ability. Events are a great time to challenge yourself in painting. And if you're not a painter, is to try to get painted stuff on the table, and making sure that you have painted stuff, even if it's very rudimentary and basic and not great, enhances the overall experience that people have when playing in an event. And so try to paint your army to the best of your ability and get it out there and on the table. Put together an event kit or a game kit that has all your game components prepped and ready to go and organized, not just like thrown in a bag somewhere and kind of disorganized. So I like to bring like a fishing tackle tray or organizers that break all my stuff out, and I have everything ready to go, maybe in a box or in a case of some sort. I'm going to make sure that I bring enough dice. So usually what I try to do at a minimum is bring my number of attack dice that I need plus 2 extra sets in case something happens to one. Or I'm just not feeling great about how they're rolling. I can swap some out. But that's at a minimum. Bringing 2 sets of dice can be great too. Bring extra dice that are not your standard D6s. So like your D4s, your D8s, your D10s, your D20s. I just find that having them available can be really useful, especially if you're doing something like, say, in battletech where you're marking elevation, or other sorts of objective scores, things like that, that can be really useful. Bring a tape measure and do it in duplicate, because what happens if your tape measure breaks or you lose a tape measure? Or what happens if your opponent breaks a tape measure or loses their tape measure, or something happens where they forgot theirs? You have an extra one on hand. I like to bring those, like Wolfnet's got them, but you can buy them from other companies. Like there's 6-inch measuring sticks that have like 6 inches on one side, 1 inch on another, two on another side, that can be really useful for working around tight spaces. I like to bring a extra base that they use as a unit marker, so that if I'm moving a unit and I don't know if I want to actually end up where I am, I mark the unit so I can bring it back to the exact spot. This is a fair play issue. Like if you move your unit and then bring it back to the approximate spot, like you can fudge your numbers, right? You can fudge where the unit was and then end up moving. You can hurt yourself by not moving as far as you could have, or moving too far if you fudge it against your opponent, but it can also affect your shooting. So using a place marker and having that ready to go. Bringing extra tokens. I like beads, the little glass beads, and I'll use those for a variety of things. Maybe I use it to mark who my XO and CO are on the board. Maybe I use it to show control over objectives, things like that, right? But they might be other tokens. Some people use tokens to mark the movement type, conditions, like if crits, things like that. So if you use tokens for those things, make sure you have those and have a pile of them. Make sure that you've brought your army and your army list. I like to laminate my army list. Other people like to put them in sleeves, but make sure those are ready to go. Make sure you have an extra list for yourself in case something happens to your primary list, and also bring an extra list for your opponent. So that's 3 copies of your list, 2 for you, 1 to be able to give to opponents before the game. And the reason you bring an extra for yourself is in case of an emergency. You misplace them, you drop them, you lose them, you spill something, and it ends up getting the inside of your sleeves wet. So you want to have those. Make sure you have your sub lists ready to go. You want to include pins, pencils, overhead markers, however you're marking off your lists. But I like to have those pins and pencils for taking notes, for filling things out. You need to have some sort of way to track victory conditions or victory points. Maybe that's some sort of dial. Maybe that's a chart. Maybe that's, like I said, those tokens, but a way to track those. Laser pointers are very useful for determining line of sight. You want to bring your rule book and all necessary charts and quick reference forms. At a minimum for Alpha Strike, you need to be bringing your critical hit table so that you can reference it. Most people don't have that chart memorized. They think they do, and they're constantly asking people around them. I've seen this a lot in events. Like, what is this on the critical hit chart, especially for like non-mech units? So if someone's running proto-mechs or vehicles or something along those lines where the tables are different. The other one is if you're running offboard artillery, is a cheat sheet on how that works if you're not familiar with it, and having that available. Also, know the rules and read the sections that confuse you. So if there's a rule you're not clear on, before the event, you need to reread and reread and reread those rules so that you're clear on it. And then pre-game or pre-event, when you're prepping, maybe ask a TO about the ruling on it. This is especially true for rules that you can expect to see that you are not familiar with, or rules that you are new to you in your unit. So let's say you've never ran C3. Like, you need to make sure you know the C3 rules, and if you need a cheat sheet, have them. Or if you're running ECM because you're worried about running into C3, you want to make sure you understand how ECM works and how C3 works in case you run into it during the game. So those are some examples there. Print off copies of the mission briefings. So you don't have to constantly ask TOs, how does this mission work? They want to be able to say, you're at table 3, you're playing Headhunter, and you just go take care of it, right? And so bring a copy of the mission briefings. I have a copy of them and I laminate them so I don't have to print them and print them and print them. And they just stay in my gaming kit that I have for Battletech. In fact, all my game systems that I play, I have a kit where I just grab the box and all my components are in there and I'm not having to scramble. And I'd recommend you do the same thing. But all the mission briefings are in there. So I don't have to ask, how do you play this mission? Because some of the missions you don't play a lot, like the less popular missions that aren't as enjoyable to play, but they could pop up in a tournament, like you might not know. And so have a copy of those briefings there. Bring extra objective markers just in case. Like, so at KSAG, we ran into an issue where people weren't cleaning their tables up afterwards as thoroughly as we would have liked as tournament organizers. And this is, a lot of it had to do with how rushed we were for time. And some of the objective markers got lost or misplaced, or they fell on the floor or slid underneath a mat, things like that. And so we were scrambling to find those. But if you had brought your own set of objective markers and you show up at the table and one's missing, you can just pull one out real quick, right? And that is super, super helpful, right? And this is something that, having this available for when you just go do pickup play is really important. Like, you probably have a set of objectives leaning around, so just bring it, right? Bring it to the game, and so you have it just in case. I always like to bring I call it my model emergency first aid kit. And this is going to include super glue plus accelerator so you can make quick repairs in the field, and a hobby knife just in case. Right. And so if you just bring normal super glue, I've been in this situation where people bring just normal super glue and they're sitting there, blowing on their model, trying to get the glue to dry, and it's not drying that fast. Get an accelerator and get a super glue I know some guys don't like accelerator because it makes the glue brittle, but I almost always use accelerator because I'm impatient when it comes to building models. But have accelerator there so that your game isn't delayed. Either the start of the game or the middle of your game isn't delayed in case a model breaks. And then you also have that available for your opponents to use or other people at the events to use, right? If you don't want to spend money, bring snacks, bring drinks that you have ready to go. Make sure your hygiene is good to go. We joke about it a lot, but it can be an issue at gaming events, is hygiene. You don't want to be that person at the event. And then dress appropriately. And what I mean by dress appropriately is be prepared for the room to be too cold or too hot, right? And that can really affect your perspective and your experience. Like, you come to a gaming event and you just have a t-shirt and the room ends up being too cold for some reason and you're freezing your ass off like the whole game or the whole event, not fun. Alternatively, you get 50 dudes in a small room, like we have sometimes at our game store in Burnsville at Dreamers Vault. You could pack a lot of people in there. It can get to be super, super hot. And so you just want to be like ready for that, right? You don't want to be like having that really affect your experience, or hanging out with like swampy thighs, or freezing your butt off during an event. So next we're going to talk about sportsmanship, and this is really key to like any experience. And I find this, I actually find this kind of funny that the WolfNet rules, the first rule of their events is don't be a dick. And the second rule is don't be a dick. Years and years ago, I was part of the WWPD podcast network, and specifically I was on the Bolt Action Radio Network for first edition Bolt Action, and we put on events, we had podcasts, things like that. And their first rule for all their events and sportsmanship was also don't be a dick, right? Sportsmanship's really, really important. It will affect your experience and everyone else's experience in the room. And people who do not have good sportsmanship and are not fun to play against, like, you're just hurting you're hurting your ability to get invited to things, to exclusive events, to invite only events, to finding opponents at pickup nights, to being invited to people's houses to play. And you can, even if you win, like if you win, but you were an a-hole the whole time and you complained and you bitched and you moaned, like, is it really a win? Right. And so you really want to keep that in mind. And there's some things that I do, and I think people can do to kind of put that in perspective and to help with the overall experience and the sportsmanship experience. So first is don't withhold information from your opponent, right? Don't be secretive about, if they ask about your armor and structure or your damage, or things about your list, just disclose it. Disclose information. And also, voluntarily do it, especially if there's something unusual about a unit. Like I talked about that commando recently. That's a 3/3. Like people are not expecting that, and so just being like, "Hey, man, just so you know, this is a 3/3 commando. Hey, just so you know, I have a C3 system, and this unit right here is the master. If you take the master out, the whole system goes down, or if you ECM him, the whole system goes down." Right? Like you don't you can disclose that and still be competitive. Like if someone's never played against a C3 system or is new and they don't know how that works, and they don't know, hey, if I just take out this unit, the whole thing goes down. They end up playing at a disadvantage, and you shouldn't be intentionally taking advantage of someone's like lack of experience or knowledge, and you shouldn't be withholding information from people. So that's really important. Always declare your intent if it's going to come down to like a game ruling, right? My is to move here and be able to see that target. Can I see that target from where I'm at? And do it before the shooting phase when your opponent doesn't think you can see, and then you have an argument arise. Also, ask your opponent about their intent. Sometimes you're playing a game and you're like, I think they're trying to, like, from my perspective, it looks like what they're trying to do is place this model in a way where they can see this one unit, but not be seen by a bunch of others. But as I look at it from my perspective, I can clearly see them. Ask them about their intent. So I might be playing a game and say, hey, is your intent to not be seen by these units over here? And they say, yes, it is. And I say, well, I can see those people. Scoot it back a little bit, call the intent, and then play by the intent that is agreed upon. Don't move into the shooting phase or move into another phase and be like, well, technically, I guess, even though we talked about intent, I still can see you, right? So declare your intent, and ask your opponent for intent. With that also goes ask questions and give answers, right? So like during a game, I feel like I'm probably pretty well known for this. I will ask about information about specific mechs. Part of it is I forget. Part of it is information changes. So one thing I might ask is, what's the damage output on that unit? Right? It's 442. Or what's his speed? It's speed 16, so I know what their threat bubble is. Or I might ask, what's their current armor and structure? Right? And I'll ask that because that helps me like make decisions in real time during the game, is to know where different pieces are at in their performance. But also, if your opponent asks that information, voluntarily give it. Don't dispute it, and don't lie about it or mislead them about it. If things are getting hot at the table because there's a disagreement about like line of sight and shooting or measurements, just get a TO or get a neighbor to come make a ruling on it, and then just accept that ruling. Don't complain and move on. Right. Um, this is a big one that I think is really important too. Is after the game's over, you want to be as courteous as possible in regards to your opponent's performance. And one of the things that I find will happen is um, people will complain about certain aspects of how the game went, and it detracts from your opponent's, and it can detract from your opponent's win. You're basically telling that you're communicating to them that I would have beat you if it wasn't for this thing that was outside of my control. So you're not really good and you don't deserve the win. And the biggest thing is blaming dice, right? And so what I like to do when it comes to blaming dice is never blame your dice for losing, right? Only blame them for winning. So what that would look like in a game is if you win the game, you tell your opponent, hey man, like that was a close game. If my dice weren't so hot, like you probably would have won the game, or it would have been a lot closer, right? So basically what you're saying is like, what you're saying is that you kind of had these dice that rolled well in your advantage, and it kind of detracted from their ability to win, right? So you're blaming your dice for the win, and what that does is it boosts your opponent's self-esteem. They kind of feel like, oh, I would have done better, or I'm better than what the game score tells you, right? And then the opposite is if your opponent has, especially if they have a really rough game, maybe you 4-0 them, is like, man, your dice really betrayed you, right? And then it just helps that person's confidence build. And the reason this is important because it makes, if people have a really bad experience at a tournament or an event, they're just never going to come back. And events are just better with more people, right? Usually. So blaming their dice if they lose and saying your dice betrayed you, is can really help boost their confidence, and then being like, and not blaming their dice when they win, and just say, hey man, you played really well. The decisions you made countered me, and maybe give specific examples, and not saying like, man, your dice were so hot, the only reason you won was because of it. Like, how good does that make you feel if someone tells you you didn't play very well, it's just that your dice won it for you? And yes, there's probably moments where that happens, right, where the dice are hot. Like, there's games where I win or I lose because of how the initiative rolls go. Like, I've won games, and the reason that I've won is because I've won every initiative roll. And I'll point that out at the end. It's like, man, how different this game would have been if I hadn't won all those initiative rolls. The initiatives really betrayed you, and it resulted in you losing, right? Or if you have a really close game, right? And the score is like 3-2 or 3-4 or 3-3, where MOV breaks the tie, is pointing out to those people that that's the reason why. Like, if one thing changed here or there, they could have won, right? Um, Highlight particularly good moves that your opponents have, especially if they put you on the rope. Congratulate your opponent regardless of the outcome. Is really, really important. Shake their hand, say good game. Provide them with feedback if necessary, especially if they're new players. Especially if they're new players, is provide them with feedback on how they did and decisions that they made. Respect the TOs and their rulings. This is super, super important. They already have enough to handle. Be mindful of the time. Make sure that you're ready and at your tables when the clock starts, and be aware of how much time is left. And I see people like, no, I don't want to accuse people of slow playing, because I think most people don't intentionally slow play. I think they just lose track of time and they're trying to make decisions. But sometimes just keeping an eye on the clock will help motivate you to make those decisions faster. Clean up the tables when you're done, and have your opponent help you clean up the tables. This is a part of not being a total dick to the TOs and helping the next set of players get ready for games. And keep your complaining and griping to a minimum. I know this can be very hard. And then here's a good one. Other than being, so part of it is being at your table on time, and with this is try to use the bathroom between games, not during games. The last thing I want to talk about is going the extra mile. This is kind of optional, but I really enjoy doing this. I know a lot of other people do too. And what we're talking about is going the extra mile to improve the overall experience of the game for other people. And this is things that kind of like lean into the lulls and the fun. The first is, when back in the day when I did the WWTPD and the bar stuff, when we had events, it became very popular to hand out gifts to your opponents. And I think this is a really fun way to improve the tournament experience. A lot of guys locally will do this by handing out extra mechs. Just give a guy a free mech, building custom objectives, making custom stickers, things like that. Compliment players on their paint jobs. Good ones, bad ones, new ones. Not everyone is at the same level. And so if you find a paint job that isn't like, they're not going to win the painting event, but it is a decent paint job, is go out of your way to say good job. Or if someone is new to painting, like, congratulate them on their effort. If you go grab a drink, offer to buy your opponent a drink. Most people will decline, but sometimes they'll take you up on that offer, and it just helps ensure that the tension from a tournament that's competitive is kind of muted. Same with handing out these gifts, giving compliments. Make a point to check in with players who are newer. So if someone's new and they're sitting around, they don't know anyone, ask them about their list, ask them about the event, ask them about how they're doing. Try to include them in things. Socialize with people who you don't normally socialize, or are not their friends. Or especially people who don't have a lot of friends. You know who these people are in your groups. Like, try to make them feel welcome and included, especially for new people or quieter people. Um, I have a note here to cosplay if you dare. This doesn't have to be a costume, but can be little things that help you lean into your faction, the narrative of an event, and have you a good time. So like I mentioned earlier, is making stickers. Maybe there's stickers for your force, or for your YouTube channel, or for your blog, or for your just who you are. Having little bios for the paint competition for your unit, little write-ups, making custom objectives, making a custom shirt or a shirt that is faction focused and wearing that, making patches, handing out pamphlets. Like, I have my Word of Blake pamphlets that I hand out when I play them that are fun. I've seen guys write up little narrative fluffs and like almost like, you know, little short stories that can be fun to do. And then the last thing is, if you and your buddies are going out afterwards and there's people who are newer or who don't have a lot of friends, especially, like, extend an invitation to them and invite them to come out. And then after the event is over, post about, take pictures, talk about the event on forums, can try to drum up buzz for the next events. These are by no means the most totally comprehensive. I tried to be as comprehensive as possible. I'm sure there's other things you can do to ensure successful events are run, fun events are run, and that you enjoy your time. If you have any other suggestions, put them in the comments below, and may the blessings of Blake be upon you.